All right, everybody. We got my good, dear friend, to quote Gary Gray, Will Greenberg. Will, thank you for being on the show. We're going to talk macronutrients. Yeah, man, I am fired up here. So let's hit it. You are a assistant strength coach for the Buffalo Bills, and you oversee a lot of the nutritional stuff for that. What was your first response when I was like, hey, Will, let's talk about macronutrients?
Macronutrients. Well, I would say my first response was, man, I can't wait to talk about why we shouldn't talk about macronutrients. That's probably my first thing that I was thinking about. Of course, there's obviously the peer-reviewed literature that has been done by people way smarter than me, that I like to use, and I use as my framework for how to go about evidence-based as an evidence-based practitioner. But beyond that, I will have to say humbly that I've failed more for all the athletes that I've coached. I have failed more of those athletes in trying to get them to adhere to that than I have been successful with. And I mean that because doing it in football with a lot of athletes, and even in basketball, when I was in basketball with less athletes, is to do it at scale is very difficult. One of the things I've always found is writing a meal plan for someone that details the macronutrient breakdown. And even if you're giving them the foods to eat, has never, I shouldn't say never, but very rarely has been successful for me. So when it comes to macronutrients, having an understanding of generally how much protein, carb, fat you should take in, the timing of it is the next layer, which is highly important. But having that understanding is really just the basic knowledge. And it's, when you asked me to speak about this and I went in to make my notes, I did less than a 10-minute Google Scholar search on, the IOC Olympic Committee consensus on sports nutrition, or Brad Schoenfeld and hypertrophy for his nutrition for hypertrophy. And anyone can find that. It's free access. It's easy. So it's not that difficult. If this podcast were to be about macronutrients, we'd be done in 3 minutes and be like, hey, that was a great talk. See you out there.
Here's some links. Yeah.
Everyone would be, 5% body fat and just thriving in life. But it's just not the way that it operates. So like I said, it's, if I'm trying to give someone a meal plan, I put a lot of time and effort into that of, okay, how is this going to be structured? What should they be eating? What are the things that go into that? And I've always found that it fell flat. And so over time, especially just my experience, but then also spending time with the Precision Nutrition Level 1 and Level 2, which I thought were both great. My interest in just how people behave, and that interest to make me a better practitioner of how can I get people to change their behaviors or influence their behaviors, or make their path a little bit easier to go along, that's going to make them more successful at their sport or their job or whatever they're trying to accomplish. With that interest, I think I've trended towards trying to create relationships with people, understand where they're at, and break down barriers of where they're trying to go, not where I think they should go. And I think that's been a really successful part of, if I have had any success with people in nutrition, it's meeting them where they are, finding what's the smallest change I can make that's going to have the greatest impact. And even that's difficult to do. And I'm starting from step zero, and it's hard to do with people because with food, there's such a cultural, emotional, psychological component to eating that behaviors, everyone eats, so everyone's an expert in how they eat. So for you to come in and say, hey, I'm the expert in how you eat, is battling, 18 or 22 or 30 years of someone who's already been an expert in how they eat. So unless someone's coming to you and saying, hey, I've had athletes at a very high level say, write me out a schedule and I'll set a timer to when I eat, and they've been really successful. I mean, that's the one that you write about in theory of like, hey, this is how it's supposed to work, and it's worked really, really well. And if in a broad 10,000-foot view, that's consistent protein feedings. The recommendation is 1.6 grams per kilogram of body weight per day, or 0.4 grams per kilogram per feeding. So you're doing that 4 to 6 times. Using carbohydrates around training very intentionally, pre, post, the different types of carbohydrates for the rest of the day. You can go as far as wearing a continual glucose monitor of figuring out what different types of carbohydrates affect your blood sugar levels, and consequently your insulin. And then using fats, just getting them through good sources of nutrition, especially through animal protein, and structuring that in a way where it's set up, knowing when they're going to train, when they're going to sleep, what kind of access they have to food, whether or not they cook or they meal prep. But like I said, I can count on one hand, and I wouldn't even fill up a full hand of people that I've done that with that have been compliant to that. One of the other examples, I think, especially in college, was a guy would come up because they knew they had to come up to me and ask me for a meal plan because they were told by a coach that, hey, they need to lose weight or they need to gain weight, or whether they felt they needed to or not. And my first response started to be, I will do this for you. I will spend the hours and hours of time to put into you if for the next week the only liquid that you drink is water. So that means no alcohol, that means no milk, that means no soda, that means nothing but water. And with that ask, immediately I'd say more than 50% would say, well, I'm not going to be able to do that. That's not possible. And that's a very small ask, but it's challenging for people because they're used to juices and sodas and alcohol or whatever they're going to drink that's not water, and like the water you have in front of you. And most failed. And if they could come back to me in the next week and look me dead in the eye and say that they did that, then I'd be willing to take the next step with them. The ironic part about that is that whether they were trying to gain weight or lose weight, the players that did that spent a week hydrating and only drinking water, started to see the results that they wanted to of both either their weight gain or weight loss just because they were doing that. And they're like, wow, I should just keep doing this. And then the friction for them to change lowered even more. So that's something I always found was, where can I, and that was probably a crude attempt at meeting people where they were, because I think I was just trying to prove a point at first. But now it's.
Are you talking when you were at Southern Utah or Appalachian State?
I remember doing it starting at Army and doing it a lot at Southern Utah.
Because you had so much on your plate. But you had so much on your plate, right? Like you were responsible for all your teams. You had one other assistant.
Yep.
And like at that point, you're going, I have to be very strategic with when and where I use my time. And if you're not even willing to just drink water for a week, then
right.
Why would I waste my time? Which is, I think, something in that, like, not to cut you off here, but I think there's an element that here's a situation where a lot of people are misguided on the fact that we're working with highly motivated people and where they think they're actually going to get the most ROI from. Like motivation is not this like ubiquitous thing. It's like very specific and things that they value, right? Mm-hmm. So some people like, I know I'm going to get playing time if I just get in the playbook and I do that, right? Or I'm a baller. All I got to do is get on the court and play. I don't need to spend any time in the weight room. Like, and the same thing with nutrition. So you have on this one end of the spectrum that people just think, oh, that person's universally motivated, right? Well, not necessarily the case. The other one, it's the incentive is aligned, right? Like millions and millions of dollars potentially be at stake if they just make better choices. And then the final aspect, which is something that I think is I work with Gen Pop. I work with a lot of just people that like, give me what you would do with an elite level athlete. Like I wouldn't do any of this stuff because the truth be told, it's like even in a situation where a lot of this stuff that you have right now at your disposal, like having meals ready for them, You can plan their meals. You can actually connect with their private chef
Mm-hmm.
who's making all their meals, or a meal
Mm-hmm.
prep service is doing everything for them. And still, the thing that really comes out of the wash is like, you have all these things in place, highly motivated, highly incentivized, and really, really like opportunistic resources. And it's still coming down to, I just got to make a connection with this person and find out where they're at and what they're willing to do before I could even get into the stuff. Because you can control everything, and it's definitely worth the time, as opposed to my situation where all those resources are not at their disposal. And then the motivation is like, I want to lose weight. Well, how bad do you really want to lose weight?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's going to hit this threshold where you're going to go to bed hungry, or you're going to have to eat foods that are not necessarily as flavorful or as palatable. And you're going to have to make this choice. And it's going to be that stressful day, and you're going to feel like shit. And you're going to want to be like, damn, we're just going to give in. And then all things are through the wayside, you know? And then it gets a paradox of this all. It's like, it's hard for everybody. And there's no there's like, from a regression to the mean, we could find this macronutrient split is perfect, and at this time it's perfect. As opposed to like the real rate limiting step is you just have a newborn, and you could plan out your weekly nutrition. Still doesn't change the fact that there could be one day that she doesn't start to sleep, and all that knowledge and all that insight and all that motivation, like, you're going to be more valued if your body composition's better and you look better. But at the sake of like, Thursday morning hits, I slept 2 hours last night, I don't care. And that's real. That's what we're all dealing with. And you can fractal that out to any kind of level. But that's what I'm hearing right now. It's like, yeah, macros I get it, they're an important concept, but reality is people are actually doing this. Maybe not as focused on that as you may think. Am I right on that?
Yeah. So I can imagine that some of the listeners of this are either going to be coaches or people just trying to improve. So it's people trying to improve others, but also people trying to improve themselves. So, the lens that I just gave my insight on is from coaching people, is how am I able to change someone else's behavior, which in and of itself is difficult. And I think, like you just said, or you just summarized, that it comes down to building a relationship with someone that is meaningful enough and connected enough that you're understanding who they are, what resonates with them, and why nutrition would be important. Because there's going to be people who nutrition may never be important enough to them, because it's always important to you as the practitioner. Like, it always seems like, well, why aren't they so? I'm giving them gold. I'm giving them
They don't get
something
it.
that is going to benefit them.
They don't get it.
They
They
don't
simply
get
just
it,
don't get it. Yeah.
But at the same time, it's not their job to care about it. It's our job to make it important to them, or make it easy enough and accessible enough that even if it's not that important, they're finding some benefit from that. I think there's a lot to understanding that and not getting frustrated by it, because nutrition is a tricky one in that there's not a lot of immediate result. So you have to put a lot of time and effort into it. And I've always noticed it takes about, for me, if I really am dialed in, it takes about 5 weeks for me to really look in a mirror and say, hey, you know what, I'm seeing something different, whether it be weight loss, weight gain, muscle tone, anything that you're looking at. But 5 weeks of, boring. And it's hard to explain to someone who in their life has eaten their whole life. They've figured out a way to survive it up until this point, and may not even recognize that they don't feel optimal. And the changes are slow enough that, and I'm sure you've heard it before, someone starts eating clean for 5-10 weeks, and then they have a, if you want to call it a cheat meal, or they eat something that's not nutrient dense, or something that is refined, and they're like, man, I feel terrible. Is this how I always felt? And it's kind of like, yeah, they're probably just now seeing a reference point. And I think that's a selling point. But to get someone to do that for a long time, you and I both know is difficult. The consistency is very hard. And coaching someone through that, it's more about behavior change, relationships, understanding, meeting people where they are, and then providing the minimal effective dose. And a lot of times it's very, very boring, which is, again, oftentimes not what people want to hear. They want to hear the hack. of, can I do this detox, or I want to do this? And I'll give, if people are looking on this podcast for my insight on that, I think the number one thing for me is hydrating to a level that you probably didn't realize that you needed to hydrate. And I'm not going to discuss or even pretend to say
Water's the fourth macronutrient,
right,
in my
right.
opinion.
And I'm not going to.
Yeah. I made that
Yeah,
up, by
that's
the
great.
way.
I've made up plenty of stuff,
Yeah.
by the way. I'm just kind of talking as fact, but I'm not going to say I understand the biochemistry as well as someone that knows it better than I do, but I do know anecdotally that if I'm trying to get the greatest function out of my body, I feel like it's always correlated with when I'm like, why am I peeing so much? Why I'm peeing 10 times a day. And when I'm doing that, I feel at my best. I'll give you another example. We did a weight loss competition a few years ago, and I think this is probably lends to the point of consistency. I really did the weight loss competition because I knew that everyone was going to ask me for advice in the building, and I decided I don't want to start giving everyone advice and for them to fail, so I'm just going to join the competition, so that I can't have any. Sorry, I can't give you advice. I am doing it too. So I planned
It's a
it out. I
conflict of
worked.
interest.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry, conflict of interest. I wore a continuous glucose monitor. I just ran a science experiment on myself. And I think the important part of a science experiment is that it's controlled. So I pretty much lived the same day for 7 weeks. So 49 days. I pretty much lived the same day in where I ate my meal, what I ate, how much water I drank, the amount of calories, the type of exercise. And what ended up happening is my body responded so easily because, and I think this lends towards some neuroscience research. I read a book, 7.5 Lessons about the brain. Lisa Feldman Barrett, I believe her name is, that the brain is a prediction machine, and it just wants to be able to predict what's going to happen next. And by giving yourself, your brain, the knowledge that when you wake up tomorrow, the first thing you're going to do is ride a bike at a heart rate of 130 to 140 for 45 minutes while drinking, 40 ounces of water, and you're going to have your first meal at this time. You will drink 200 ounces of water. And it became easy. It became one of the hard parts about losing weight is the discomfort of it. And I did not feel uncomfortable at all because my body knew what was going to happen. It was almost like the homeostasis was losing a pound a day. And I ended up losing 39 pounds now granted, some of that I did a water cut at the end safely, I will add, but I called the guys at the UFC training center and asked how am I supposed to do a water cut here? But in reality, I probably lost about 29 or 30 pounds in those 49 days very easily because my body was so consistent. And that's, again, the two things that the principles that I just laid out of hydration and consistency are so boring that if I tried to sell that, I'd be about as successful of a businessman as if I were trying to sell broccoli.
Yeah.
Like no one wants that.
So on that note, though, because obviously I agree. I think you look at bodybuilding, you look at anything that's body composition driven, like the outcome or the incentive is tied into who's got the best body comp. You see this extreme regimen. But with that comes, though, too, and this is something that I actually got from the book, The Great Starvation Experiment. So I don't know if you're familiar with this, but Ansel Keys, the guy who's basically the cholesterol, like we know Ansel really well, he did a controlled experiment on starvation examples during World War II because his biggest fear was famine striking all of Europe, and they wanted to do clinical research on the impacts of starvation and how to get people out of it and try to figure out what supplements to take and what actual macronutrients are going to have the biggest net impact to regain their weight. Or if we have food scarcity, what do they need from a micronutrient level to survive till we have food increasing? It's really, really amazing book. And it's like a really seminal research. So you had 30 people come in starved them pretty much to about, I think, 25% loss in body mass. Some people lost up to 50%,
Mm-hmm.
and then kept them at that for 6 months, and then tried to regain the weight in the last 3 months of that. So a full year of clinically researched starvation, and then trying to get them back up. But the really big one was the psychosis associated with it. Like, these people went insane. One guy, like, multiple people had to leave the research because they've done physical harm to himself. One guy cut his hand off while chopping wood. They were required to get like 10,000 steps a day just to kind of like get the necessary output of exercise to burn the calories, relatively speaking, to controlled feedings. It's amazing, amazing research. And like, a lot of the actual weight loss research still to this day is based off of that research. And it's like, goes in this whole thing of using human subjects for like really invasive things. And there's a whole other thing of these guys were World War II defectors. They didn't want to go to World War, like, go battle because they were pacifists. So they essentially put them in a weird position of like, serve your country without fighting, like, or be the person that never really sacrificed himself for the greater good of humanity. It was an amazing book and like a lot of psychological insight. But you and I have talked about this, like, off of like fit your macro based diets, of like, there is a downside to some of this like myopic focus on just carbs, fats, and protein. Like, maybe some autoimmunity, maybe some like some eating disorder type outputs. And like, I know people really struggle with that. And like, one of the things about a routine, once you get momentum, one small deviation, like, damn, I ran out of cottage cheese and fruit for that Thursday morning, and your whole day is in a tailspin, right? And you just fall off the wagon and just, so there's like a lot of elements of like these like hardcore routine based diets. And I felt it firsthand when I did bodybuilding. Like, I was like borderline eating disorder, right? And that's why I struggled to even come close to doing that today. I probably have never really wanted to do a very hardcore macro based approach at that regimen based off of the level of systemic impact that had on me when I did it. But talk about potentially the psychological impact of that, and how well did you transition or assimilate back to normal life after you did that body comp challenge?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely am no expert in the realm of psychology. I don't have my degree in anything, but I will talk about my lived experience of it and what I've seen from and talked to with people that I work with around nutrition. Um, the motivation for me was strong because there was a monetary incentive of winning a competition. So that's all right, 7 weeks, and I'm also
And you're very competitive.
yeah, I'm very competitive, and I'm someone who very much enjoys and lives my life by routine. I actually just had my second child, and she's born on the same day as my first child. So, gotta love routine.
Great. That's just great
Yeah.
planning. Just great planning.
And
know when you're best ready to reproduce, and you just, all right, here it is, man. I hear you, man.
I'm someone who really thrives in a routine in ways. So for me and my personality, it meshed. But again, it was only 7 weeks of my life, and it was at a time where I felt like I had the resources to do that, and I was going to run it as a science experiment. So it was interesting to me. I wanted to see how to stabilize my blood, what would stabilize my blood sugar the best. I wanted to see, how I hadn't been under 200 pounds since high school. Could I get back under 200 pounds? So there was like these motivating factors, and there was also a longer term factor of, well, the 7 or 8 weeks after that is leading up into summer. Now that I'm super lean, will I be able to put on how much muscle mass can I put on? So then it was the next experiment. So a lot of it to me was motivating because there was a purpose involved. But a lot of that purpose was also out of my curiosity, and it wasn't necessarily in vain of, how do I feel about myself? And if I didn't lose the weight, would I feel worse about myself? It was more of an objective experiment to see what would happen. I think that when things are tied up, when it comes to nutrition, when things are tied up about how you feel about yourself in your lived experience, that's a different set of parameters, and also it's open ended where it doesn't end. So it's like, okay, I feel, man, I have to do this for the rest of my life. I don't know if I could do that, and that's where rebound effects happen. Because I will say that people, I knew that the transition out of that was going to be a difficult one, both physiologically and psychologically. So I prepared for that, but not everyone does, and people have a rebound effect of, well, I did this diet, now I'm skinny, and okay, now I can go back to eating normally, and the body is thrown into this loop of, wow, I'm not used to this, and I am going to take advantage of it for as long as I can, because I don't know. I've been starved for the last X amount of weeks. I don't know when the next time. But again, the brain is a prediction machine. I don't know when the next time is that I'm going to get this. I'm going to hold on to this calorie, or I'm going to hold on to this
Yeah.
energy, so that I can store for another time. So I think there's a component of having a purpose to what you're doing, and it's so cliche to say to make it a lifestyle, but really it's not about the outcome. It's about eating in a way and treating your body in a way that shows that you're respectful towards what your body is. And I think that's a way to look at it of, here's this objective being of a human body. Can I take care of this thing? And I'm going to make good decisions for it. I'm going to make bad decisions for it, just like I do in life. I can make good decisions to walk away from an argument, or I can engage in this argument at Thanksgiving with a crazy uncle. You know what I'm saying? Like, there are all these decisions you make on a daily basis that are good and bad. It's the same thing with eating. It's just more visible of an outcome that, oh man, now I feel bloated, or man, I'm not as skinny as I want to be, or I need to lose weight, or I need to gain weight. So it's always kind of reflecting right back in the mirror of whether or not you're doing the right thing. And I think they talk a lot about that with precision nutrition, um, about the psychological effect of eating. And now that I have two daughters, I have to think of eating in a very different way, because my job is about keeping people within a 3 pound range for their performance. And I don't want to approach my raising my children that way, because it's not healthy from a fact of a female growing up thinking that their weight is supposed to be a certain place. It's a very specific thing in sports to keep someone's weight where it is. It's a struggle. So again, going back to coaching people on that, it's a psychological component. There's a component of trust and relationship with that person to say, hey, I'm not trying to make you feel bad that you're not in your weight range, or that doesn't make you a worse person. You and I both have a purpose to try to get something accomplished, and it's done through these means. But I'm painting a picture like that's just okay. That sounds good, and everyone goes on their merry way, and it works every time. Like I said, I the ratio of failure to success there is much higher than people are willing to give credit for, or maybe I'm just not as good as as other people at doing that.
I was
But I
always
would
great.
say,
I was the best at it. I never failed.
yeah, right, yeah. I
Because I
single-handedly,
always just lie to coaches. I would
yeah,
always lie to coaches when they asked me what the guy's weight was. I'm like, I'm thinking my best case scenario. What do they want to hear? Like, oh yeah, such 279, man, he's crushing it. Like, really? Wow, okay,
that's
great.
great, yeah,
Because last week he was like 249. Like, yeah, no, he's been doing
yeah.
great, man.
30.
Like,
I got the
what?
plan for him. 30 pounds in a week, so
Yeah, man, just hard work,
yeah,
dedication, man. That's all it
that's all it
takes.
takes. So yeah, there's we've
I,
gotten off the topic, obviously, of macronutrients in terms of what the research says, but like I said, I don't think there's much to be discussed beyond what the most current consensus would say, and
mhm.
strategizing of because even once we get into the strategy of how to use those macronutrients, it's all dependent on the effect of someone's life that it has on it. Now that I have two
Yeah.
children, two and a newborn, my sleep is affected. My day is
Mhm.
affected. Just being able to be on this call is, there's a short window of time that I can do this, let alone meal prep or cook my food or get my meals in. And I think another important part of, if we're talking about macronutrients in terms of energy source um, and calorie, is there are so many things that also it's it's not simple. Like, you can make it simple as a framework, but the things that affect that framework are vast. So if you get under 6 hours of sleep, you will hold on to more of a calorie than you would if you got 8 hours of sleep. So you're going to be holding on to more energy just because you didn't get the adequate amount of sleep. So you could have you could have two people you could run in a parallel universe, the same person sleeps 5 hours every night and has the same exact diet. And the other person in the fifth dimension or whatever sleeps 8 hours a night and has the same diet. They would have two different outcomes. And so just that alone is wild, that the idea of just macronutrients, calorie in, calorie out, it's a great framework to go by, but it's not always 100% accurate. There's another I'm gonna butcher the way to say this, but I remember we were at West Point. I remember us talking about this. Your gut bacteria. The majority of your gut bacteria are divided into firmicutes and bacteriodes. I believe I butchered bacteriodes. Whatever it is. Anyway, Missing Microbes is the book that I read. This was back in 2014 when
Blaze,
we first started.
Right? Blaze, right? Those the name?
Martin Blazer. Martin Blazer. Martin J. Blazer.
The Blaze, man. Yeah.
And so,
man, what a time to be alive back then. We were so big in the gut with Perlmutter and the Blaze, man. That was the peak of gut bacteria phase in our lives, man. That'll come back around too.
It will. It always.
That's going to get cool again. It's too important now.
Yeah, the obese population has a higher amount of firmicutes, and the ratio is higher in one than in lean people. And when they did fecal transplants or they changed the gut bacteria of obese patients, they drastically lost weight, which was bizarre.
I think that was also too the part we're talking about, like trends and patterns. Like that's a really big process. Like that's a very daunting thing to ask someone. And one of the things that we're getting, I think, was coming out here is sleep is just a lot harder to change, right? People I don't have any bandwidth to do that. Where it's I can tell you to eat more or less of something and you feel like you have more control and autonomy of that. Like you can be more capable of that. And I think that's where the big thing comes out. If I was going to say, hey, Will, man, you could get way more from your peri-workout nutritional supplement stack if you just get an extra hour of sleep. I get it. I'm not arguing that. It's just not a possibility. I have an infant and I have a toddler and I work early in the morning. I understand. I agree with you. It's just not realistic. So what are my options to count the calories or count the macros tomorrow? But I think the same thing with hey, look, if we improve your gut biome and the diversity of bacteroids versus firmicutes in your actual gut, you might have a little yeast overgrowth and tolerate carbohydrates a little bit better. You might be able to metabolize maybe potentially proteins and fats and carbohydrates a little bit better, get more value from the things you're eating. Maybe you just need to supplement it with a probiotic or eat more probiotic or prebiotic rich foods with fiber and all these things. Yeah, dude, I don't know. How much carbs, fats, and protein do I need to eat tomorrow? And it's all good, man. But the same token too, it's you're running against a brick wall, or you're always running at 80% of what you could possibly be from the stuff that's going to take a lot of effort. If you just sleep more and get more, just better gut diversity or lower your stress and all these things that are really impactful. But I think the thing that comes out a lot in the wash is that's daunting and intimidating. Getting a fecal transplant when Perlmutter's the end of the book, it all just gets changed around. The most compelling research we have is when obese people do fecal transplants, was basically just taking fecal matter and injecting it into someone's colon. That's a big fucking ask. And I think that's where it gets crazy, because it's then it reaches this threshold of how bad do you really want this, And are you willing to give me an extra 30 minutes of sleep tonight?
Yep.
7 days in a row?
Yep.
No. Okay, I got to titrate down what I'm telling you here, because it's that's the rate limiting step.
Right.
It's you did with the water challenge of you just drink water for a week and then we'll have a conversation.
Right.
They're not going to want to sleep more, and you go, whatever I tell this person to eat or not eat, it's not going to have a net impact that's 100% positive anyway. Yeah. So let's just stay here. But that's the kind of next question I had here, because come back on the macronutrients. One thing that I'm thinking a lot about lately is this nitrogen balance effect. And like I've been pretty like steadfast on 1 gram per pound of body weight of protein every day, like right, no matter what, like weight loss, weight gain. If you're working out, great, you have a net positive amino acid pool and nitrogen balance. If you want to lose weight, it has a very low insulinic load. You can preserve the muscle mass you have. Just a higher thermic effect of feeding, yada, 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 yada. But the question I have for a guy like me, particularly, so this is a personal one, is like, all right, man, I've been 200 pounds for the last pretty much 20 years, and I eat 200 grams of protein pretty much every day for the last 30, whatever I've been doing, right, since I was 13 years old. I've been stuck, even if I do make a bigger commitment to cardiovascular exercise or being in a deficit of losing weight. And I'm wondering if just that amino acid or that total protein intake kind of put this like set point at a certain body mass of like, you're always going to be in this net positive nitrogen balance or this like amino acid pool. Do I tinker with the amino acids or the protein, or is that like, is it a calorie thing? Because that's something I feel like I'm pretty locked in a lot of variables. It's just that one thing I've been pretty steadfast on, whether it's I'm going a ketogenic or a lower carb approach, or even on the other end, it's just a lower caloric intake or increasing my cardiovascular exercise. Still not much moving the needle in terms of weight loss. Like, have you any thoughts on that? Like when you did your experiment, did you tinker with your protein amount or did you keep that pretty steady?
I didn't intentionally tinker with my protein intake. I just ate so much less is number one.
Mm.
So it automatically was tinkered with, but I didn't set out the goal. I knew that to lose weight also, since I was probably about 15% body fat at that point. It was like post season, and you just have so many
Oh, so
chances to
good.
eat, and you're just kind of
Oh
a
yeah.
little bloated at the end of the year. But
When are you gonna get ice? When are you gonna get ice cream sundaes
yeah,
again on
right,
Friday? Like you'll never have that again
right,
ever. And if you don't, you're actually losing money if you
yeah,
think about it, right? Like that's coming out of your paycheck
yeah.
somehow. You
But
know,
like you,
it's just part of the amenities, man.
yeah, but like you, I've had this set point of muscle mass. I mean, I've lifted weights. I'm 35 now. I've lifted weights since I was probably 13. That's 22 years of lifting weights consistently. And of course, I'm still not as strong or as big as I would ever want to be, but like that's 22 years of establishing this set point of, even though muscle is a metabolic cost to the body, it would be hard lost. It would take a change in stimulus, to like an overwhelming change in stimulus, and that's what I did. And I ended up, of course, I had to lose muscle mass in order to lose weight, um, in order to compete in the competition. Um, but I think the biggest thing that I did, I was exercising according to my Apple Watch. I'd say I'd averaged about 2,200 calories of exercise calories, not just my
Wow.
RMR. 2,200. So I was doing 45 minutes of cardio in the morning. Then I was doing a circuit training, and I was coaching. I was coaching in the morning too, all morning, and then at lunch I would do like a metabolic circuit of some sort, and then maybe a high intensity interval, 15 minutes of cardiovascular work that way. And so I was banking a lot of calories, and
Mm.
I was actually matching my calories to the amount of exercise calories that I was. So
Interesting.
like if I was burning 2,200 calories of exercise calories, of course guesstimated by my watch, but it was a relevant set, standard point that I was taking. I was eating 2,200 calories,
Okay.
and I was doing that with a lot of a lot of my protein was salmon, or a lot of the food that I was eating was leafy green vegetables. Um, I was staying. I had a very low fat intake just because, um, the calorie density of that. And I was also keeping myself
Hmm.
sane with these Yasso Greek yogurt 100-calorie bars. I'd have two of those a night, and they were amazing. I mean, I still have them. They're incredible. Sea salt caramel. So that was like my point of like, I'm keeping myself sane, and I'm doing this. I had no dairy. I would have a pretty normal dinner, but to go away from just the specifics, it was just I was exercising as much as I was eating, which is an insanely drastically different calorie intake than I was used to.
Yeah. And it goes into the next thing. If you're resistance training and you're accustomed to doing really like high intensity or hitting a lot of actual time under tension and like using this, like you're fixated on recovering from that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you're thinking, I need a certain amount of protein, certain amount of protein, I need a certain amount of carbohydrates. So the activities that you're doing, like I don't know. I mean, you do need a lot of like replenishment from the activities that you were doing,
Mm-hmm.
from extensive cardiovascular work and high intensity interval work. But truth be told, is I'm not leaving a 30 to 40-minute hit workout and thinking, damn, I got to replenish all the amino acids and the protein and the carbohydrates that I expended. I probably as comfortable not eating after or something like that as I would if I did nothing in the morning anyway. Yeah. Versus you do like 6, 12, 24 or another protocol that's really challenging. It's probably very similar from a metabolic standpoint or metabolic stress standpoint. I'm thinking, oh, damn, I got to get at least 40 grams of protein and 100 grams of carbohydrates because I don't want to feel like absolute dog shit tomorrow. Mm-hmm. So the activity component probably is like just you got to break that cycle as well, mm-hmm. right? Like 200 grams of protein and strength training 3 to 4 days a week. Like that's another thing that you have to almost like reframe mm-hmm. and look at. Like the goal is weight loss. Mm-hmm. Like if you're the thing that creates this loop or this continuous loop off of like carbs, fats, protein is your strength training sessions, then you might need to revisit that in the first place and maybe do circuits that probably just could do amino acids and not try to like get a ton of protein afterwards. Mm-hmm. Or I'm going to do cardiovascular work, or like, all right, man, the goal is weight loss. So just do things where I can do a steady state for an extended period of time. Have you, did you do any like a high intensity work? Because even when I did my bodybuilding show, like my goal is like to strength train all the way through. And my thought is if I can lift a certain amount of intensity, relatively speaking, to my max from when I started, and preserving muscle mass, and I'll be able to put it on faster when I'm done. I was 20, I lost 23, so my metabolism is different.
I lost a considerable amount of strength through that process for sure. Yeah. Weirdly, when I did my bod pod before and after, and it said I lost like a pound of muscle. So it was kind of strange. But again, those are estimates based off what your body fat percentage was. My body fat percentage was like 4%. So I lost a lot of weight, and relative to that, it was a lot of non-lean like fat mass. But I don't think that calculation is accurate. That I didn't lose. I only lost 1 pound of muscle. But if I did,
that's back of the hand. That's back of the hand.
No, it was super lean. People were getting really upset that I had lost so much weight. I was like, it's a competition. What do you want me to do? You know? But it was it was. But I think to answer your question about you being at the age you are and training for that length of time, I think one big thing about that is that there is benefit. Not only will it make change, but the benefit of getting very uncomfortable to make change. So like, even if that's we're talking physiologically of like, man, I don't want to do an hour of long steady state cardio. That's physically just annoying and mentally annoying. But there is some benefit there to doing that if you're trying to make change. I think the biggest thing is getting really, really uncomfortable and outside of the norm in order for anything to make an adaptation. And we always talk about, it says be comfortable being uncomfortable, or, you can't grow in a fishbowl and stuff like that. And I think what ends up happening is like, in that sense is like, well, we've lifted weights for 25 years. And it's like, man, I'm going to go and just crush myself in the gym and get super uncomfortable and lactic and feel like I'm going to throw up. But at the same time, that's not really the same discomfort as changing completely what you do. And I think the first one of just like 6, 12, 24 and killing yourself in the gym would make less adaptation for you than it would something a completely new stimulus. So I think part of that is doing a new stimulus instead of doing more of the same stimulus, or just slightly rearranging it. If someone were to be looking for actual meaningful change, it would have to be outside the norm of what they're already doing. that's the difficult part, because what we started talking about is coaching people to make significant change, and it's very uncomfortable for people to do something new to create significant change. So I think it works in the same way, coming from the other side of someone who's so detailed in what he does, of making those type of changes of like, well, I'm uncomfortable doing an hour of cardio because I don't want to lose muscle mass, because I've always wanted to keep muscle mass on. Well, that's that's a whole different stimulus in order to make change. So
Yeah.
it's it
Yeah.
works both ways.
It's well, I mean, go into a couple other things of like, I did a Moxie analysis of looking at my rate of oxygenation of certain muscle tissues, particularly my quad during biking. And to be completely frank, like, I am very much a sugar burner, like, and I go through anaerobic pathways really, really quickly because I'm just so conditioned to that.
Mm-hmm.
But 99% of probably all of my exercise has been strength training or anaerobic and anaerobic lactic. And, it's no wonder why when I'm getting ready for a workout, I'm like, damn, man, I could go for a quick carb hit, and like, because I'm going to use it so prevalently when I'm working out.
Mm-hmm.
Or why, like, I dread fasted workouts because, just quite frankly, it's really challenging for me emotionally and psychologically. So you get this like, well, if I get a bar and a banana, or maybe like something that I'm going to have a quick hit of some glucose and like go hit it, I feel a lot better about training. Same token too, though, again, like what you're talking about, you got to break this loop. If you want to lose weight and you got to be in a caloric deficit, you got to have to match your psychological approach to everything you do in a different way.
Yeah.
Like I know how I'm going to feel if I'm doing that. Yeah. If I'm doing that without carbohydrates, I know how that's going to feel, and I don't want to feel that way. But the point is you got to feel that way, and it's like, almost got to do different things.
Yeah.
And when you're doing 60 minutes of steady state cardiovascular work, that moment of like glycogen being depleted and just that like psychological drop, and you kind of like just lose track, or you get like not lightheaded, but like just disoriented, and you're like, damn, man, what the fuck am I doing? Like it's a delayed process, but that like you almost need to like reframe and recondition yourself to go, exercise has a different point right now, relatively speaking, to the goal.
Yeah.
And I think that's the part too, like that's so hard. And the other part is changing your environment, right? Like, I remember we were talking about like, you're doing this challenge, and I believe you have a Peloton at home, right? Like that's different than if like I got to go all the way to a facility to do 60 minutes of cardiovascular work. Like having that one small change, like when I was at Army, they redid my kitchen and we had no access to any stove. And so it's like everything was either in its raw form or cold. And it's like, what a great way to like lose weight because food was cold all the time. And me, I'm not a microwave guy. That stuff will kill you.
Bland food,
so it's like,
food is a great way to lose weight.
Yeah, you're just like, there's no like enjoyable experience here. So it's like, I could eat more lox and have more raw spinach with my hand, or I could just not eat. And sure enough, a couple of weeks of that, you start to lose weight rapidly.
We didn't even get,
these little environmental changes.
We didn't even get to talk about hyperpalatable foods, having an effect on macronutrient intake, all that too. But you're right. I mean, just at the end of the day, bland foods will make you want to eat less, but it's boring. So I would say if I were to wrap up my idea of when you asked me the first thing what to talk about with macronutrients, in my head, the only thing I wanted to talk about was boring consistency, drinking water, and that's about it.
Yeah.
And it's so
awesome.
boring, and you can obviously structure your protein intake and be consistent with it, and you can use your carbohydrates intentionally. And I do those, and I have a lot of people do those, and it's successful in ways that if I need to be in a caloric deficit, I understand that I need to eat less. If I need to be in a caloric surplus, I know that I need to eat more. And you can do that by manipulating carbs and fats and keeping your proteins consistent all the time. And there's a little nuance to be guided around there of if you're going to be in a caloric deficit, do you increase your protein just a little bit? Sure. But there's also mixed research on it. I think one of the big things to leave with is the idea that all of this is a complex problem, which means there's no best practice to it. People want a best practice, but there's not a best practice. There's good frameworks. There's best frameworks to that. And
Yeah.
what it is, you need to figure out emerging solutions. So there are people that thrive on a low carbohydrate diet. There are people that are terrible on a low carbohydrate diet. There's no one answer to be done. There are laws of thermodynamics. You need to be in a caloric deficit or a surplus or whatever you're trying to do. But as you start observing as from a scientist's lens of, well, man, I feel really flat on days after I drink milk at night, or, I feel really bloated after milk, or if I don't get a lot of carbohydrates in, I get a headache, or I don't feel strong in the weight room, or I don't feel energetic, or if all these different things where everyone has these personal reactions to food and also their preferences to food of what they're able to do. And as that information emerges and you're watching patterns, then you make decisions of, well, I know if I want to be lean and I get bloated when I have dairy, I'm not going to eat dairy. Whereas someone else might thrive on the fact that it's a great, the research that says chocolate milk is the best way to rehydrate because of the amount of carbohydrates in it that goes along with it. And it's right. I mean, in theory, it's a great way to rehydrate. But it might make someone feel worse, or it might make someone cause gastric distress. So what I'm saying is that the emerging solution is individual to the person, but they need to be paying attention and they need to keep the variables around that consistent, which is, are you getting your sleep? Are you hydrating? Are you consistent in what you're eating throughout a day? Are you exercising consistently? Are you doing these things? Like, are you keeping your stress, your subjective experience? What is it? Are you stressed? Are you meditating? Are you doing things that are psychologically good for you? And if those things are consistent and you can keep those relatively consistent, then I think that you can start to see patterns of, is the food that I'm eating taking me towards the goal that I want? And then, you could do a whole new different podcast on goal setting and what that looks like. But really consistency, drinking water, and knowing that there's no best practice, there's just emerging solutions is what I could have said at the beginning of this, and we didn't have to talk for 50 minutes.
Well, I would come back to it. We used to always say it. Everything works if the people doing it just cared more, right?
Yeah, they don't get it.
If they just care. Yeah, exactly. The people that don't have success are the people who don't care.
The Washington Post used to say, if you don't get it, you don't get it. And I think that's a great line. If you don't get it, you don't get it.
That's it. Seems like a you problem, right? This should work in theory. It's just only problem would be is it doesn't work with you included.
Yeah, it works in theory, but the problem is life. That human beings are doing it. Yeah.
Just when you wake up tomorrow morning and just remember this is for you, just remember to care and you should work out just fine. Well, man, I appreciate you taking the time, man. This is awesome. This is great insight and honestly, really cool, man.
I think this might be the shortest conversation you and I have ever had. So.
Yeah, no, and we've had a lot of offline conversations too. So this is good. This is just giving the meat and potatoes, quote unquote, with a little bit of broccoli in the side.
No doubt. I'm selling that. If also, Will's broccoli, I'm going into business, so it's going to be real.
Great Will Greenberg. Yeah, great Will Greenberg pro tip: when you're at the grocery store, just rip the stem off the broccoli, and you get all the nutritional value. And then we learn that you pay by the actual.
Why do I want this?
Yeah, but then we learn the most fibers in the stem, and it's not weighed by the pound; it's weighed by the bush. It's priced by the bushels. It didn't make a difference. Yeah. You're just leaving stems randomly around.
That's a great pro tip.
That and it's in food fat at solid or room temperature is safe to cook with. Yeah. It's got a higher smoke point. That's it.
Sense at the time.
It did. It made perfect sense. I still live by that. Sarah's like, hey, what should we cook with here now? What's the thing with a smoke point? I'm like, if it's solid, it's fine. You can cook with it. You're good. Bacon, coconut oil, palm oil, it's good. Butter.
You want to kill the germs on your hand, just use hot water. If the germs are uncomfortable,
if it's uncomfortable for your hands, exactly. That's what I'm saying, man.
Ones that we made up in the past.
Nah, and I'm stuck with it, man. It just if it's easy to say and
Yeah,
people believe it, that's all that matters, man. It's memorable, it's sticky. All right, man. Well, thank you again. I appreciate the time, man.
always.
All
That's
right.
it.